But yeah, we're going to watch this video, the complete history of Warhammer 40k lore. We're gonna see. I mean, like, I never played Warhammer. Should I put, like, subtitle or something? Oh, that's auto-generated subtitles. Okay, I think it's fine then. Guys, you ready? We gotta get started.
In the grim darkness of the far future, long before the advent of mankind, the galaxy was the scene of a confrontation so grandiose that its echoes echo even into the 41st millennium. These events were called the War in the Heaven, an ancient, almost mythical battle in which powerful races and cosmic gods came together. In the beginning, there was a civilization called the Old Ones. According to legend, it was they who formed the foundation of the entire galaxy, using unique psychic abilities
Is that
and traveling
Pathfinder?
through the warp using a network of interdimensional pathways, the future webway. The ancients lived incredibly long lives and possessed technology that even in the 41st millennium seems like a miracle. They are believed to have had a direct hand in the emergence of new races, including the Eldar. On the other side of the universe, the Necrontyr race was also evolving, a morbid race that was fading under the rays of its merciless sun. Their short and misery-filled lives had made the Necrontyr embittered against the world. Their exceptional envy of the Old Ones' longevity played a decisive role when fate brought these two great civilizations together in a military clash. While searching for a way to escape their impending doom, the Necrontyr entered into a fateful alliance with the Catan, powerful star entities. In exchange for an oath of service, the Catan gifted their new allies with the secret of gaining almost eternal life.
Damn.
Thus began the journey of transforming the Necrontyr into Necrons, their minds immersed in cold metallic shells of living metal. Soon, driven by anger and new power, they declared war on the ancients. Thus arose the War in the Heaven, a conflict of colossal proportions involving not just warriors but the Catan energy gods themselves. The catastrophic battles literally ploughed through star systems, destroying a great variety of life forms. The Old Ones, once powerful lords of the galaxy, suffered terrible losses. But eventually the Catan faced betrayal as well. Having dealt with the ancients, the Necrons rebelled against their gods, shattering their essences into shards and turning them into weapons. The war ended with the Necrons, exhausted by centuries of confrontation, deciding to go into hibernation for millions of years, hiding in the depths of their tomb planets and waiting for the moment when the galaxy would be defenseless again.
Okay.
The ancients have all but disappeared, leaving behind only technological secrets, scraps of knowledge of the warp, and a legacy that other races, primarily the Eldar, have used in the future. When the Necrons went into hibernation, and the Old Ones disappeared almost without a trace, the galaxy found a relative calm. But it was the Eldar who were to take center stage in the New Age. According to legend, they were the children of the ancients and had mastered the vast holdings of the galaxy, utilizing their knowledge of the warp and the webway, a network of safe passages that allowed them to travel vast distances in an instant. The Eldar, with their powerful psi abilities, took military, science and art to unprecedented heights. They were driven by cultural and spiritual pride, bordering on arrogance. In this golden age, they easily defeated other races without encountering any equals. But the absence of serious threats led to decadence. Affluence begat carelessness, and many Eldari plunged into the pursuit of new pleasures. unaware that their collective passions were echoing in the warp. At first, the troubling symptoms went unnoticed. No one doubted the Eldar's unrivaled technology of anti-gravity and exotic materials, and the unquestioned hegemony established by the ancients' disappearance. Their vast star domains had no strict centralized governance, but unity was maintained by a common psychic foundation and pride in divine origin. It was their lack of limitations and colossal psi abilities that would eventually play havoc with them, beginning the birth of a monstrous force in the darkness of the warp.
The evolution of mankind.
As the Eldari star roads illuminated the galaxy with their bright, though doomed glow, life went on as usual on Earth, a distant and unremarkable world. Here, under the relentless sun and peaceful skies, a race was born that was destined to play a key role in the events of the 40th millennium. That race was mankind. In their deep antiquity, humans were nothing more than primates who gradually learned to use tools. Millennia passed, epochs changed, Paleolithic, Mesolithic, Neolithic.
The scariest creature has been born.
Uneven, bursts of culture, then backsliding into savagery. But one peculiarity even then distinguished mankind among other forms of life: curiosity and the urge to explore. The desire to explore the world around them, to conquer nature, and to look beyond the horizon eventually led to the creation of the first civilizations. From the Sumerians and Egyptians to the great empires of antiquity and the Middle Ages. Many centuries later, technology and science began to develop particularly rapidly. Mechanization and electricity appeared, followed by much bolder ideas. Mankind ventured into space, first short flights to the nearest orbits, then to the moon. By about the third millennium, the foundations of future space power began to be laid on Earth and the newly formed colonies. People learned how to build ships for long-distance expeditions, search for suitable planets, and even laid the foundations for understanding warp, the shadow dimension through which interstellar travel faster than the speed of light can be accomplished. However, as often happens in human history, bold dreams were followed by conflicts. Political and economic contradictions resulted in local and sometimes global wars. Gradually, several powerful nations engaged in large-scale colonization of space. On planets outside the solar system, people founded outposts and began to develop natural resources. Civilization seemed to be making a great step forward, but within it there were serious threats: environmental crises, power struggles, and most importantly, unknown dangers lurking in the warp itself. The endless expanse of the galaxy holds more than just material monsters like orc hordes or reborn necrons. Far more insidious is the realm of immaterium, populated by entities that humanity has so far barely understood. But even in the early stages of space colonization, people encountered strange psychic phenomena, nightmare dreams, and ship systems failures when entering the warp. There was talk of demonic entities and cults erecting their own hidden idols. Most tended to think of it as superstition, the result of stress and the unpredictable nature of hyperspace. Nevertheless, even such dangers could not stop the human thirst for expansion. Over the millennia, humans spread across multiple systems, building entire metropolises on distant planets. Powerful corporations and governments sometimes fought over resources, spawning mini-conflicts that were the precursors to much larger wars. Yet despite the feuds, colonizations took their course, forming the early human cosmos. In this era, there was not yet a single state to unite Terra and its colonies. Humanity existed in a variety of forms, from liberal republics to corporate oligarchies to totalitarian regimes. But overall, hovered the idea of progress and development, the belief in technology and science. People's energy, their persistence in exploring uncharted spaces seemed inexhaustible. At the dawn of human civilization, when the first cities and kingdoms were just beginning to carve their names in stone history, Terra was secretly inhabited by one who was to become the greatest leader and symbol of humanity. Legends say that the Emperor appeared among us many thousands of years ago, carefully concealing his true nature and power. Some believe him to be the embodiment of hundreds of ancient shamans merged in one body. Others see him as a unique psionic, born by the will of the earth itself. But whatever the real explanation, one thing is constant. This creature transcended the limits of ordinary human nature. The Emperor's life, according to legend, passed through shadows and secrets. He shunned glory and open rule, preferring to guide people gently and almost imperceptibly. He may have been behind the emergence of early philosophical teachings or the formation of progressive empires. He influenced the development of language, culture and technology, guiding prophets, scholars and rulers to the right ideas and advances. Thanks to his virtually immortal essence, the Emperor has seen civilizations crumble, religions and dynasties disappear, and still mankind inexorably strives forward to a new era of knowledge and opportunity. While technological progress on Terra moved at a snail's pace, the Emperor looked closely at the weaknesses and strengths of humanity. He saw that humans remained susceptible to greed, vanity and fear. But at the same time, he also saw the greatness of spirit, the thirst for knowledge and the capacity for selflessness. It was to protect these better qualities that he continued to live among us, preparing for the fact that sooner or later, mankind would have to face far worse threats than earthly strife. Most people were unaware of the presence of the great patron, but the shadow of the Emperor was already spreading over many countries and cultures. His plans, however, went far beyond Earth alone. He was preparing to take mankind beyond the confines of his home planet into the vastness of space,
so
where
actually
people would
gonna
not
fight
only
now.
find new worlds, but also come face to face with the ruthless, universal reality. To eventually lead this truly galactic campaign, the Emperor had to prepare himself and the entire human race for the inevitable trials. Thus ended the era of mysterious manipulations and observations, and the time was approaching when the Emperor would step out of the shadows and take the fate of mankind into his own hands. But first the planet had to go through a phase of global change, from the first human spacewalks to technological leaps that would be both a blessing and a curse. It would be in these centuries that the conditions would be created for the Emperor to build the foundations of the future Imperium, a great power that would stretch its iron threads across the galaxy. After many millennia of being confined to the surface of their home planet, the time has come when mankind finally dared to look to the stars, not just with a dream, but with the real possibility of reaching them. By about the third millennium, a considerable time after the historical eras of the ancient world, the Middle Ages and the Modern Age, Earth's technicians and scientists began to go beyond Earth orbit and explore the solar system. Technological advances over the centuries allowed the first permanent colonies to be built on the Moon, Mars, and a few other suitable planets. The search for new paths to the stars led people to experiment with a variety of methods of space travel. Sublight travel, which seemed at first the pinnacle of achievement, did not solve the main problem: to overcome the monstrous distances between the stars, where hours and days turn into long decades and centuries. But during this period, researchers stumbled upon an extremely dangerous but promising phenomenon: warp, or as it is also called, immaterium. Theorists have suggested that in this parallel dimension, it is possible to shorten the duration of travel by skipping a ship through another space. At first, warp exploration was completely crude and risky. Expeditions that dared to test hypotheses often returned with distraught or missing crew members. Survivors spoke of nightmarish visions, heard voices appearing just inside their skulls, and equipment recorded anomalous bursts of energy. The lines between material reality and the psychic world in warp are so thin that any emotion can take monstrous form there. And yet, Despite
there's
all the
stuff
risks,
out there
the
like you
human
never
urge
know
for
actually.
expansion and
You never
sometimes
know.
selfless sacrifice overcame fear. Gradually, the initial principles of navigating through the warp were worked out. Humans created early versions of defense fields, experimental force barriers, and special systems that allowed ships to surface in normal space, more or less intact. The problem was that these jumps remained highly unstable. A slight disturbance in the immaterium was enough to disable an entire ship, and sometimes an entire fleet. There were rumors of cursed travelers, crews who returned from the warp possessed or insane. But as history shows, nothing stops mankind in its quest for the unknown. Step by step, technology improved. And so in the centuries following the discovery of the warp's capabilities, colonization spread wider and faster. On distant planets, people began to build entire cities, cultivate the soil beneath
It's pretty
greenhouses,
interesting.
and extract the valuable resources needed for further technological advancement. Some colonies declared independence, and new communities and cultures sprouted among the stars. It seemed that this was the breakthrough, that humanity would soon conquer hundreds or even thousands of worlds, moving from dreams to reality. However, this dawn had its dark side. Some outposts were hit by unnatural warp storms, communications were severed, and colonies disappeared without a trace. The rare surviving ships brought back eerie tales of demonic phenomena or paranoia gripping entire crews. Specialists began to suspect that the warp world was inhabited not by mere energy flows, but by something intelligent and extremely hostile.
Oh wow.
What humanity
This
would later
design is
call
so
the
damn
forces
cool.
of chaos. But it was still too early to fully understand this threat. It is important to note that it was in those years that an extramural alliance between Earth and Mars was born. Technocults and inventors flourished on Mars, whose mechanisms became the cornerstone of cosmic progress. Thus, something like the future centerline of the Imperium was formed. The power and resources of Terra multiplied by the fanatical devotion to the science of Mars. Although the Emperor's formal alliance with Mars would come later, it was during this period that humanity gained the foundation for future greatness and for future conflicts. Thus passed the era of space exploration and the first discoveries of the warp, an era of daring experiments, successes, and tragedies. Humans gained access to the colossal expanse of the universe, but at the same time opened the door to the nightmarish reality of the immaterium, where creatures roamed, feeding on the darkest emotions of sentient beings.
Or fall of the elder.
At the turn
the children
of
of
the
the
25th
nerd.
millennium, humanity was on the rise, continuing to colonize the stars and explore the warp. But at the same time, somewhere in the far reaches of the galaxy, a cataclysm was brewing that would affect the fate of millions of worlds. It was the tragedy of the Eldar, a race that had once seemed unshakable and almost divine. For centuries, the Eldar lived in luxury, in a world where there were no limits to creativity, exploration of psychic powers, and the pursuit of pleasure. The technological and cultural power they had accumulated over the millennia made them virtually invulnerable to external enemies. Orcs or other Xenos were easily dismissed, and the threats of the warp were simply not thought of. At a time when humans were still learning how to build colonies in deep space, the Eldari had webways, a secure network of passages through the immaterium. They could move easily between their magnificent colony worlds, and there was nothing to indicate impending collapse. But the problem lurked within the Eldar themselves. Their psychic potential was immense. Thought, emotion, and will could be translated into reality almost at the wave of a hand. It was this subtle connection to the warp that led to their fatal degradation. The more the Eldari immersed themselves in refined and in time perverted entertainment, the more the dark energy of their desires and passions accumulated in the darkness of the immaterium. The collective psyche of
So
the
it's funding
entire
them,
race
okay.
became a gigantic crucible where the wildest fantasies and vile vices flared up. Soon this energy-informational storm of feelings resulted in the birth of a new god of chaos, Slanesh, the embodiment of sophisticated sensuality and vices. The culmination occurred so rapidly and apocalyptically that almost the entire civilization of the Eldar was swept away by one single psychic explosion. Multiple Eldari worlds were devastated in a matter of moments. Billions of Eldar died, their souls dragged into the warp, where they were devoured by the newborn Slaanesh. The Eye of Terror, a colossal warp rift that tore the fabric of reality and became a projection of Eldar Vice onto the material world, was formed there at the point of the Great Breach. The origin of Slaanesh and the Eye of Terror had catastrophic consequences for humanity. Warp storms erupted across the galaxy, severing communication channels between planets. Colonies that once thrived on supplies of resources and technology from Terra became isolated for decades and centuries. Distant worlds were plunged into famine, disease, and internecine warfare. The entire vast network of human settlements, built up over centuries of space expansion, crumbled like a house of sand washed away by the tide. On Terra itself, events took such a grim turn that this period went down in history as the Techno-Barbarian Age.
The Big Bang.
The formerly unified system of government collapsed. Large clans and warrior alliances used the surviving wreckage of technology to assert their power. Entire baronies and empires emerged under despotic rulers. Some of them possessed nuclear weapons and even primitive versions of force weapons. But these achievements were developed and maintained by a handful of techno-priests, jealously guarding their knowledge. Countries once able to fly to other planets together now fought fiercely over the pathetic remnants of high technology, fragments of spaceports, energy cores, or genetic laboratories. Scattered scientist enthusiasts risked their lives trying to preserve the documents of the former space age. But most of humanity slipped into savagery, fighting with spears and firearms in the ruins of ancient cities. The old night had come, a time when the prospect of a revival of galactic power seemed as fantastic as the fictions of the warp gods. Nevertheless, the fires of enlightenment were still burning in some places. On Mars, religious techno-cults had taken shape, striving to preserve and develop machine knowledge. Their machine god was the mysterious Omnissiah, later identified as the Emperor, though at that time these were only the seeds of the future Adeptus Mechanicus. And on Terra, darkness reigned for the most part. Brutal warlords called techno-barbarians led the various powers, waging endless wars over resources and sometimes even mysterious artifacts from the past. It was the same on the other surviving planets. Without supplies and mutual support, colonies collapsed, and people degenerated from high technology to primitive cultures. Of course, periodically there were alliances or confederations that attempted to revive past glories. But none of these projects stood the test of time and chaos. Warp storms still raged, distortions roamed the cosmos, dragging with them demonic echoes. Ships that dared to go on long voyages went missing, and those that returned brought only horror stories of monsters that tore from the depths of the immaterium. When the warp storm subsided and the age of techno-warfare reached its peak, the Emperor decided that the time had come to unite humanity and lead it into a new galactic age.
Yeah,
He relied
fight!
on an army of thunder warriors, the mighty prototypes of the future Astartes. These genetically and biotechnologically engineered fighters were incredibly strong and resilient, allowing the Emperor to consistently crush the dictators who held Terra in an iron fist. The Unification Wars were some of the most ruthless in history. The Emperor realized that as long as at least one powerful techno-warrior remained alive, the threat of a new anarchy remained. Clan after clan were subjected to his will, and at the end of each battle, the Emperor offered the defeated warriors a choice: to join the future unified state or to fall with the tyrants. In parallel, he negotiated with Mars, whose fanatical devotion to the machine god and preserved resources made the planet an important ally. Subsequently, the United Pact of Terra and Mars cemented the symbiosis between Earth's power and techno-prowess, becoming a solid foundation for the future Imperium. With the major techno-warriors fallen, it was time for the final unification of Terra. The formerly fragmented states swore an oath to the Emperor, who set about creating a new system of government and rebuilding the planet's industrial potential. A significant milestone was the proclamation of the Great Project, the formation of a powerful state to protect humans from external threats. It was called the Imperium of Mankind. Cities were renamed, monumental buildings were erected, and shipbuilding and weapons technologies laid the foundation for future galactic expansion. Rumors persisted about the tragic fate of the Thunder Warriors themselves. They allegedly suffered from genetic instability and were eliminated as soon as Terra submitted to the Emperor so as not to pose a threat to the new era. Whatever the case, at the end of this bloody era, Earth was transformed from a field of strife into the stronghold of a young power, the Imperium, whose name would soon spread to thousands of planets. Now the Emperor turned his eyes to the vast expanse of the galaxy, dreaming of reclaiming the scattered colonies and preparing for a battle with Xenos, pirates, and the dark forces lurking
The
beyond the
strongest
borders
empire
of
ever.
civilization. When Terra was finally unified under the Emperor's rule and the grand transformation had begun, the time had come for the next step, venturing out into galactic space to reunite the torn colonies of humanity and establish a unified order. To realize this truly titanic plan, the Emperor planned to create new, even more perfect warriors and commanders who would become the vanguard of the coming campaign. Thus was born the greatest of his plans, 20 Primarchs. Each Primarch was supposed to embody certain ideals: bravery, wisdom, iron will, impeccable understanding of tactics and strategy. The future legions of Astartes, genetically enhanced soldiers for whom Primarch genes served as a kind of nucleus, were developed on their basis. However, barely had these great beings been created, the gods of chaos struck. The forces of warp kidnapped the
cycles on
baby
the water.
Primarchs and scattered them to various planets throughout the galaxy. This act was to undermine the Emperor's great mission, for he was left without his invincible sons. But the Emperor was determined. First, he assembled the existing legions of Astartes, whose genetic basis was still intact under the control of laboratories on Terra and Mars. Then he began the Great Crusade, gradually expanding the borders of the Imperium while searching for his scattered sons across the stars. This crusade grew to include more and more worlds, becoming the grand event of the time. Each time the Emperor found one of the Primarchs, he became the leader of his legion, bonding with thousands of Astartes based on his genetic code. In those years, the Emperor's forces had waged countless campaigns across the galaxy. Human worlds, from the most technologically advanced to those severely degraded after the Old Night, met the crusade in different ways. Some where the population gratefully accepted the Imperium as liberator, and some where there were brutal rulers who had to be overthrown by force. These conflicts revealed the diversity of human cultures that had emerged in isolation. Some were fanatically opposed to any outside forces, others relied on the power of religious cults or ancient techno-guilds. But the Emperor believed that humanity could not be strong by being fragmented and at war with itself, and so each such world had a choice to make: join the Imperium or fall. In parallel, the forces of the Imperium faced the colossal threats of the Xenos. With each such confrontation, the Emperor's fame and power grew. Fortune accompanied his quest, and gradually he found lost Primarchs. Some of the Emperor's sons were idolized by the people, others feared as ruthless conquerors. But as they were reunited with the Emperor, each became part of a single project, the Great Crusade, whose goal was to unite humanity and prevent a repeat of the horrors of the Old Night. These were the golden years of the Imperium.
Let's
the technological
go.
leap, the many victories, the
Kinda
echoes
like
of
a
a
galactic
greatness
civil
that
war.
meant a great
Hell
deal
yeah.
to a humanity previously mired in endless strife. The dark shadows during this triumph were almost invisible. Few thought what rebellions and prophecies were brewing in the depths of the warp, how much the gods of chaos longed to undermine the growing power of the Imperium. All that is known is that the Great Crusade marked a new stage in history. There was a unified, powerful human alliance led by a virtually divine leader and his semi-divine sons, the Primarchs. And this confidence in their invincibility brought humanity to the brink of the most important and tragic events
With the
that
horn
were
and
already
everything, right?
waiting
Yeah.
ahead. As the Great Crusade approached its climax, the Emperor saw fit to step back from direct command and entrust all military operations to the Primarch Horus Lupercal, the most illustrious and most loyal of his sons.
Okay.
Horus was proclaimed War Master, the supreme military leader of the Imperium. No one doubted his talents as a commander and charisma capable of rallying the legions, yet beneath the outward confidence and glory were dangerous seeds of doubt. In some battles, Horus encountered mysterious forces corrupted by the warp. These encounters and their attendant tragedies shook his faith in the infallibility of the Emperor. Meanwhile, the Chaos Gods, entities that dwell in the Immaterium, skillfully fed these inner doubts, promising Horus unprecedented power and insight into the true nature of the universe. In the end, even his phenomenal fortitude did not save him from his gradual descent into the abyss of betrayal.
That's sad.
Thus began the Horus Heresy, the greatest civil war in the history of the Imperium. Under the influence of Horus and the Chaos Gods, some of the Primarchs also turned their backs on the Emperor. They were joined by entire legions of Space Marines who had previously stood guard over humanity. Among the most notorious traitors were Angron, whose rage embodied the fury of the bloodthirsty Chaos God, Khorne; Mortarion, who ended up wallowing in the stinking gifts of a disease-causing force; and Magnus, who possessed incredible psychic power and believed himself to be in the service of the greater good, until he was trapped by mystical intrigue. Such stories were repeated throughout the galaxy. Yesterday's brothers found themselves on opposite sides of a deadly conflict. An era of turmoil had begun for the Imperium. All the resources accumulated during the victorious expeditions
The huge
had to
bear
be
thing on
turned
their
against
shoulder.
its own sons. Huge armies that had previously fought the Xenos and liberated human worlds were now fighting among themselves, causing monstrous damage to the state. Orcs and other hostile civilizations, not encountering such a concentrated repulse as before, began to activate on the fringes of the Imperium's domain.
Oh my god, the orcs
But
finally
the main
here.
battle was fought within, where traitors established beachheads, conducted extensive chaos rituals, and amassed armadas capable of assaulting the most fortified systems. With each new battle, Imperial forces lost control of the galaxy's borderlands. Legions of loyal Primarchs tried desperately to hold back the traitors, but time was steadily working against them. A serious blow to the Emperor was also the loss of trust in the eyes of many warlords and even entire worlds, who could not understand how a figure as great as Horus could turn against his father. Thus, instead of a victorious march to new sectors of the galaxy, the Imperium found itself embroiled in a self-destructive war. Supply routes were interrupted, dozens of military campaigns were frozen, and the uncharted annexed worlds were plunged back into chaos for lack of outside support. This civil war was not just slowing down expansion, it was calling into question the very future of a united humanity. At last the armada of treacherous legions, spurred on by demonic forces and the fanatical zeal of Horus, descended upon Terra. Their greatest prize was the Imperial Palace, an impregnable citadel, a symbol of the Emperor's power and authority. The defenders, drawn from the loyal legions and armies of the Imperium, steadfastly held off the onslaught
What the hell
while
is this
plasma
design?
volleys blazed around them, and the black magic of the Chaos Sorcerers hovered in the air. There was no question of any other fronts. The fate of humanity was decided here and now. At the climax of the siege of Terra, the leader of the traitors, Horus Lupercal, took a step that showed his insane confidence.
You guys see
He
some stuff.
removed the flagship's defenses in order to lure the Emperor into a duel with him and bring the betrayal to its logical conclusion. The Emperor, realizing that further protracted fighting would exhaust his already strained defenses, accepted the challenge and boarded Horus's ship. This decisive battle became one of the most legendary in the history of the Imperium. Two colossal wills clashed. Father and son, once close, now deadly enemies. The very air split under their blows, and every moment was saturated with warp energy and psionic power. In the end, the Emperor managed to deal the traitor a blow from which he could not recover. Horus perished, his body and soul shattered in the mangled veil of warp,
Your
and
dad
with it
is
the
your
Chaos God's
dad.
hope of ultimate victory that day was lost. But the Emperor, having defeated his greatest enemy, paid a terrible price. His wounds were fatal. Losing his last strength, he returned to the palace
Oh my
and
God.
ordered himself to be placed on the Golden Throne, a unique device capable of keeping life in the body on the verge of death. In the past, the throne had been planned for other purposes, such as controlling webway and warding off the dangers of the warp. Now, it was the Emperor's permanent dungeon. Eerie mechanisms kept his heartbeat and psionic activity going, while his physical existence was reduced to a barely perceptible flicker. With Horus's death, the heresy's bloody march ended, but the destruction was monstrous. The remaining traitorous legions retreated into the depths of the Eye of Terror, and the loyalists began to heal their wounds, picking up the wreckage of troops and infrastructure. At the same moment, the Imperium space was left without a direct leader. The Emperor could no longer physically manage affairs, being in permanent oblivion and only mentally extending himself over the people. Power, therefore, passed to a formed council known as the High Lords of Terror. They became the supreme governing and legislative body, attempting to preserve the system built by the Emperor. Even then, however, many realized that the previous Golden Age had passed. While the spirit of the Emperor continued to hover over the Imperium, keeping the astronomical navigation beacon alive and giving people hope, realpolitik was becoming a bureaucratic mechanism. The legions of the Space Marines were preparing to reform, never again to repeat the horror of betrayal on this scale. Not so long ago, the giant legions of the Space Marines were the bastion of humanity's military might and glory, but the bloody events showed how dangerous such a massive concentration of power in the hands of a single leader could become. Realizing that a repeat of such a catastrophe would destroy the Imperium, Primarch Guilliman, who led the Ultramarines, embarked on a radical reform of the Astartes organization. The embodiment of his initiative was the Codex Astartes, a detailed manual regulating everything from troop numbers and structure to tactical principles of combat and rituals for accepting new recruits. According to the Codex, the formerly unwieldy legions were broken down into smaller and more flexible units, chapters. The main idea was that no one commander should no longer have absolute power over the many thousands of troops. Now each order was formed according to rigid parameters, where the key threshold, 1,000 combat brothers. In addition, some orders were given their own symbols and traditions, but all of them were obliged to follow the spirit and letter of the code. For the Astartes themselves, this division was a serious challenge. Legions were more than just military structures. They had centuries-old cultures, close-knit bands of veterans, and traditions dating back to the Great Crusade. Now many Space Marines had to leave those they had fought alongside to join the new successor orders. Some Primarchs and commanders accepted this change with a creak, but realized that this was the necessary way to save the Imperium from internal threats. The orders that emerged from this reform came to be known as the Second Founding. They inherited genetic material, symbolism, and some of their combat rituals from their parent legions. Each of these factions further evolved independently, acquiring their own distinctive traits, planet recruits, and mission. Some retained more rigid charters and ceremonies, while others tried to become closer to the peoples of the planets they defended. At the same time, the traitorous legions, unable to wage a full open campaign, retreated into the depths of the Eye of Terror, the cradle of the Chaos forces. There they hid from retribution, occasionally launching daring raids on nearby sectors. Immersed in dark mystery and demonic rituals, these legions were losing the vestiges of their former ideals, sinking deeper and deeper into the bondage of the Chaos gods. For the Imperium, this meant a constant lurking threat. They never knew when or where the next traitors would strike. Thus, the second founding was a key milestone in the history of the Space Marines. It laid the foundations for the structure that has existed in subsequent eras. Several hundred independent orders capable of operating as a single force or autonomously in different sectors of the galaxy. Despite the doubts and sacrifices, such decentralization strengthened the stability of the Imperium. Now, a single large-scale rebellion could not tear it apart from within overnight. Guilliman, the author of the Reforms, had gained a reputation as a lawmaker and architect of a new order for the Astartes. Many loyal warriors, still shaken by the recent breakdown of trust, found in the Codex a foothold and clear rules to follow. Since that time, each order has realized that its mission is not only to fight external enemies, but also to keep the purity within, not allowing the shadow of rebellion to darken the future of humanity again.
Oh my god, start with the cold stuff.
As the smoke of the post-heretic battles died down and the Emperor sat half dead on the Golden Throne, a new spiritual movement began to grow throughout the Imperium. The Emperor began to be seen not just as the greatest ruler and savior of mankind, but as a true deity. In the absence of his active power and direct statements, the emerging religious factions were increasingly bold in proclaiming him God Emperor, and a cult of universal worship was born in the palaces of terror. In time, this movement developed into a centralized organization, the ecclesiarchy. Its leaders declared the tenets of the Emperor's divine essence, calling for unquestioning devotion to the Holy Throne. Giant temples and cathedrals with Gothic spires were built on planets where people could pray for deliverance from heresies, xenos, and other threats. In those very decades, the foundations were laid for rituals, psalms, and ceremonies, some of which are still practiced in the 41st millennium. However, the spread of the cult entailed a rapid rise in fanaticism. Imperial propaganda convinced that every action and every thought must be subject to the will of the God Emperor. This cemented state structures, armies, adeptus administratum, and navies were all woven into the same ideological system. Even former secular officials realized that religious loyalty could trump mere discipline. In essence, the cult had become a spiritual glue, binding millions of worlds together. In parallel, the Adeptus Mechanicus, the guardians and priests of machine knowledge, saw the Emperor as an avatar of their omnisire, the machine god. This led to the sacralization of technology. Servitors, weapons, and all machinery were officially considered consecrated under the auspices of the Emperor. Processes that had previously been purely technical became covered with ceremonies and rituals. Every adjustment or repair was furnished with a religious rite. In practice, such a system helped to keep complex devices in working condition, because only members of the Mechanicum understood how these sacred relics were organized, while the masses considered them miracles. Thus, by the middle of the 35th millennium, the imperial cult had become an integral part of governance. It both inspired people to military exploits and served as a pillar of ideological control.
Crazy.
In the minds of the masses, the emperor was no longer just a great ruler, but a living deity, whose presence, albeit on the brink of death, still guided the destiny of mankind. Although the emperor himself had rejected the divine nature in the previous era, the new reality dictated its own terms. Without the sacred image atop the throne, his vast power might not survive at all in the harsh world of eternal war. At the turn of the 41st millennium, the forces of chaos were once again active, most notably Abaddon the Despoiler, a sinister warlord who had inherited the will of Horus and cheated death on his way to power. His Black Crusades shook the Imperium's frontiers several times, but despite the horrors, humanity continued to stand. However, the 13th Crusade, unfolding amidst increased warp storms, was truly catastrophic. Abaddon staked his claim to the planet Cadia, located at the entrance to the Eye of Terror. Cadia had long been considered an invulnerable bastion of the Imperium. Its defense, fortifications, and numerous Cardian shock troops provided a reliable blockade against chaos incursions. For centuries, this system had been the lock on the door, keeping the Dark Legions from freely venturing into galactic space. Whoever controlled Cardia held the key to the strategically important passage from the Eye of Terror to the rest of the sectors. When Abaddon and his Black Legions and demonic allies descended upon Cardia, the Imperial fleets rallied around that planet in a desperate attempt to defend the bastion. Fierce battles began, quickly escalating into a multi-layered confrontation, from space battles in orbit and neighboring systems to city battles right in the ruins of Cardian fortifications. The Space Marines, Astra Militarum regiments, and Mechanicus combat titans had to fight in absolute hell. Warp distortions opened everywhere, dropping hordes of cultists, demons, and treacherous Space Marines. Despite the heroism of the defenders, the planet Cardia fell. This event was a colossal blow to the Imperium's morale. The immortal phrase, "Cardia stands," was suddenly no longer valid. The loss of this fortress did more than just kill one world. It opened a gap in the defenses through which the legions of chaos could advance unimpeded into the Imperium. The collapse of Cardia was the fateful point beyond which the dark energy of the warp surged into the material world with unprecedented force. As a result of demonic rituals and weakened defenses, the Great Rift was formed, a giant warp rift that cut the galaxy almost in half. Like a terrible wound in the body of the universe, it permanently divided the Imperium into two parts. On one side remained Imperium Sanctus, where the sacred Terra, Mars, and the bulk of the Imperial systems were located. It was there that the surviving fleets and combat forces flocked to try to maintain some control over the warp corridors. On the other side was Imperium Nihilus, deprived of direct communication with Terra and plunged into the darkness of endless warp storms. The worlds in this region are effectively cut off from the center, forced to survive under the constant pressure of chaos and the growing aggression of the Xenos. Following the formation of the Great Rift, demonic activity rates skyrocketed everywhere. On planets once considered safe, portals to the Immaterium opened up, and monstrous entities burst forth with a thirst for murder and corruption. Countless chaos cults on Imperial worlds gained momentum, staging riots and ritual orgies that drove entire sectors into anarchy.
It's another war.
Witchcraft storms raged in the warp itself, making traveling through hyperspace even riskier. For millions of Imperium citizens, it was a time synonymous with apocalyptic fear. Suddenly it became clear that the colossal machinery of the state, built on fear and faith, could not protect all worlds at once. Instead of the previous localized campaigns, it was now a matter of catastrophes of entire sectors. Only thanks to the fanatical devotion to the God Emperor and desperate mobilization of resources has the Imperium not yet finally collapsed. Thus, a new era was born, in which the Imperium of men is not destined to return to its former stable state. The Great Rift became a reminder of the dramatic defeat, a barrier dividing the galaxy into light and darkness. And in this darkness, Chaos and its allies felt more confident than before, preparing the next blows that would once again put humanity's very existence on the line. During this dark period, rumors circulated throughout the various worlds of an impending miracle associated with the name of a long-fallen warrior, Guilliman, the famed Primarch of the
Gilliman.
Ultramarines. Most dismissed such stories as empty hope, for Gilliman had been lying motionless since the heresy of Horus, immersed in stasis so as not to die of mortal wounds. However, a team of scientists and engineers led by Archimagos Belisarius Cawl had spent years researching ways to possibly regenerate the Primarch. Cawl had access to the rarest of technologies, obtained from the Emperor himself before the end of the Great Crusade, but to activate it required a powerful psycho-magical impulse, something that would surpass the capabilities of the Imperium. And that's where Ivrain, spirit-bearer of the Eldar god of death, Aenead, stepped in. In a series of dramatic events chronicled in the Chronicles as the Gathering Storm, the Eldar and humans combined forces to perform a unique healing ritual. When the Primarch opened his eyes, demonstrating an incredible rate of regeneration, shock and excitement swept through his closest associates. In a matter of days, he had recovered from thousands of years of stasis and was wearing armor created with the latest Mars technology.
That's crazy.
Upon returning to active life, Gilliman had barely had time to realize the depth of the tragedy that had befallen the Imperium over the past centuries. Faced with the bureaucratic machinery and dogmatic ecclesiarchy, he became enraged, but quickly realized that action had to be taken immediately. The Primarch immediately began to reorganize the defenses. He proclaimed a series of emergency measures to save the outlying worlds trapped by Imperium Nihilus. Gilliman called upon the Space Marines, the Astra Militarum, the Fleet Armadas, and even the Adeptus Mechanicus for a new unity, for the threat of chaos had become too great to rely on old internal strife. The emergence of a living Primarch was a symbol of hope for billions of people. At last the Imperium had a charismatic leader capable of taking the reins of power and fighting back against the omnipresent forces of chaos. But Gilliman would soon realize how deep-rooted the problems were, and how much effort he would have to put into revitalizing the stagnant and overgrown system. Nevertheless, his return was undeniable proof that the legends of the Primarch's great past and personality could still be realized, even in the bleak future of the 42nd millennium, where war consumes every spark of light. The return of Gilliman was a turning point for the entire Imperium. Realizing that the Great Rift had brought humanity to the brink of catastrophe, the newly risen Primarch proclaimed with unprecedented determination the Indomitus Crusade, a grand military and political campaign designed to reorganize defenses and save the crumbling state. Belisarius Cawl, who had previously surprised everyone with the Gilliman Resurrection Project, unveiled another engineering marvel, a new generation of space marines called Primaris. These warriors, with their improved genocode and modern equipment, were to make up for the losses of the imperial chapters, which had been serving on the front lines for 1,000 years and had thinned considerably over the endless centuries of war. As soon as the Indomitus Crusade was announced, the main
I like how the
imperial
armor
forces
get more
rushed
simple
to
and
rebuild
simple
lost
looking.
ties and reclaim worlds that had fallen into
over
chaos
the
or
time.
fallen from terror's power altogether. Desolation and fear reigned everywhere. Planets that had previously prospered now saw
Less
only
engrave and
devastation,
like,
as orc
you know.
invasions led by warlike war bosses turned sectors into zones of total carnage and destruction. Wherever the Greens were seen, anarchy always ensued. The orcs did not recognize long negotiations and blew up everything in their path, forcing the Imperium to transfer colossal reserves to the most
The
remote
ore is
and
like,
scattered regions.
we don't take gaslight.
But this was not the only problem. In the depths of space, the Tyranids were becoming more and more active, becoming increasingly adept at devouring the biomass of entire systems. Colonies isolated by warp storms, where there was no way to get help quickly, were under attack. At the same time, there were increasingly ominous reports of the awakening of the Necrons, an ancient race that had fallen into hibernation and now emerged from their tombs in armies. The Necrons were rumored to be
Oh, wow.
ruled by a mysterious silent king who would restore the Iron Legions to their original majesty and strike
They're
fear
finally
into
awake.
even the most sophisticated Adeptus Astartes. In addition to all these threats, legions of chaos were spreading their wings, getting wind of the cracks in the defences and trying to reach Imperium Nihilus worlds that had been nearly cut off from terror. Mutinies, cults and other manifestations of rebellion flourished precisely where the authorities from Terra no longer had enough hands to restore order. Guilliman, realizing that without a coherent chain of command, the whole crusade thing could collapse, employed Primaris and for the maximum, trying to stabilize the many disparate fronts at the same time. But since the Imperium was by then a vast and clumsy machine, mired in bureaucracy, the Primarch's plans often ran into resistance from conservative factions. Despite the odds, Guilliman's will and faith in the God Emperor inspired trillions of people, many of whom already thought their existence was doomed. The legendary Primarch, who emerged from the depths of the past, enlisted the support of Mars and the skilled craftsmen of Mechanicum to launch new production lines of weapons and machinery.
Interesting.
Primaris quickly proved their effectiveness, as their genetic stability and enhanced characteristics made them true storms on the battlefield, capable of turning the tide of seemingly lost battles. The Indomitus Crusade was never an easy march of victory, but rather a protracted confrontation on countless frontiers, with enemies ranging from monstrous orc hordes and abominable tyrannid hive fleets to the afterlife metal of the Necrons and the invisible shadows of chaos seeking to reach the heart of the Imperium. But it was because of this campaign that the entire system still held together. Soldiers and civilians alike burned with hope, seeing Guilliman acting not only by force of arms, but also by deep reform, revitalizing dead bureaucracies and restoring humanity's faith in its own future. This era began as an hour of absolute peril, but it was also an hour of courage, when the immortal spirit of the Emperor, reborn through his son, once again raised the people against the unprecedented threats of a dark galaxy.
I have a question. Not that. But I have a question, guys. So, you survived the vid, congratulations. Ah, that's where Mayo goes down the rabbit hole. Warhammer. I have a question. Guys. So, like, because I never played the game, right? So, when we start the game, this whole thing, was it like ongoing while we play the game? Or is it like this is before the game that happened? You know, like when we started. The timeline and stuff. Like where were we? Like when we started it. This is like all preamble usually. Yeah, that's why I'm curious, right? Like do we just start, for example, like, you know, before everything happened, there's only two races, like two species that fight each other, and then later we have the Empire one, which is like very interesting, right? Because they represent mankind, and then like they, like, you know, they fight the theology, and then like this, the, you know what, the immortal, kind of like the immortal creatures, right? Kind of like right there, and then later they kind of win, right? That's the part. And then there's also a civil war that we could like jump into it, maybe. It's set in the year 40,000, so stuff in the video was like prior, and Empire Fallen around 35,000 or something. So we can actually like go anywhere when we play the games. Bounce around stuff. Yeah, I feel like it too. But I'm curious, you know. Like when they put like lore video, it's like, do we like go anywhere? And then, or is it like at the end of it, where all this thing already happened, and we can only find like artifact or like whatever note that we have in the game to figure it out? You know, there's a video of people board gaming the fall of the place that lead to the giant warp scar. Ah, interesting. Yeah, it's interesting, this one. I like it. What the game is and what group you are. It is roleplay aspect of it. Yeah, I figured out too. Because, like, you know, we could be anyone here. Basically, there's too many. There's actually too many. We can be the traitor side. We can be the sun. Oh, we can just be the ore. Can we just be the ore? It looks like the ore is the most chill here. I kind of want to be the ore, guys. Looks like the ore is the most chill in the whole lore. On current GRA, I have no idea what that means, Betsy. All love for Popper Scrubber. Ham ham, hi ham ham, hi Zero, hi Talus. Yeah, from all this lore, I feel like the ore are the most chill. They're just like, hell yeah, we need food. They're not like trying to conquer the world. They're just like, hell yeah, we need food. We like chaos. And then when people try when the other guy try to talk to them, they're like, hell no, we explode. Hell no, we bomb you. we don't take gaslight, you know. I kinda like the ore. I kinda like the ore right there, you know.